Good evening. I'm and coordinator of the Jamaican Language Unit. The Cassidy LePage Distinguished Lecture honors two notable linguists who worked on Caribbean languages, Frederick G. Cassidy and Robert B. LePage. Together, they gave us the Dictionary of Jamaican English, which was published in 1967 with a second edition in 1980. Frederick Cassidy is credited with the creation of a phonemic writing system for the Jamaican language. That system was modified by the Jamaican Language Unit and is called the Cassidy JLU Writing System. The JLU ran 2 free online workshops in October on the anniversary of Cassidy's birth. Another was held on the 7th of November at the request of the Translators and Interpreters Association of Jamaica, so that entrants in their translation competition can learn and use the system. Responsible for having trained an entire generation of Caribbean linguists at York University, including the founder of the Jamaican Language Unit, Professor Emeritus Hubert Devonish. This event is hosted by the Jamaican Language Unit, which is located in the Department of Language, Linguistics, and Philosophy at the Mona campus of the University of the West Indies. The Cassidy LePage Distinguished Lecture has been around since 2006, but there was a decade-long hiatus between the second and the third lectures. The first Cassidy LePage Distinguished Lecture was delivered by Guyanese scholar Professor John R. Rickford of Stanford University. Now that I've given you some background on the lecture and the people that it's meant to honor, I will call on Dr. Vivette Milson-White, the head of the Department of Language, Linguistics, and Philosophy, to do the formal welcome. Dr. Milson-White is an expert in rhetoric and academic literacies. She's a senior lecturer and is in the first year of her second term as head of the Department of Language, Linguistics, and Philosophy. Dr. Milson-White.
Thank you, Chair. Esteemed guests, Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education at the University of the West Indies, the UWI Mona, Professor Sylvia Coinberg, colleagues from the Mona campus, other UWI campuses and universities in Jamaica and in other jurisdictions, students at the UWI and other universities, ladies and gentlemen all, good evening. We have gathered, as you've heard, for a special occasion, the 10th Cassidy LePage Distinguished Lecture. This now annual event is a cornerstone in our academic calendar, a time when we pause to reflect, celebrate, and engage deeply with the ideas that shape our understanding of language and its profound role in society. Established to mark International Creole Day in October, this distinguished lecture series also serves, as you've heard, as a tribute to two pioneering giants in the field of linguistics, Frederick Cassidy and Robert LePage, whose visionary work continues to inspire many. This evening, as we gather in this vibrant academic and cultural community in the virtual space, I extend a warm welcome to everyone who has joined. Special acknowledgement to past presenters in this prestigious lecture series, whose contributions have enriched our collective journey of inquiry. I also wish to recognize the invaluable contributions of past coordinators of the Jamaican Language Unit, and I extend a special welcome to them and to our esteemed honorary research fellows. Your dedication to the advancement of linguistic scholarship here and beyond is both celebrated and cherished. Ladies and gentlemen, this evening's lecture represents more than just a moment of intellectual engagement. It is a reaffirmation of the commitment of the Department of Language, Linguistics, and Philosophy to rigorous research, thoughtful reflection, and meaningful dialogue. The tradition of the Cassidy LePage Distinguished Lecture is one of excellence. Through it, we confront complex questions with a shared sense of purpose, always striving to arrive at insights that are both profound and practical. And this evening, we are privileged to be in the company of a scholar whose name resonates deeply in the realm of linguistic advocacy. A tireless champion for those whose voices are too often marginalized, Professor Michel DeGraff has dedicated his life's work to illuminating the intersections of language, human rights, and cultural identity. His scholarship, from which he'll share with us this evening, bridges continents, beginning here in the Caribbean and extending to Asia Minor and beyond. Through his work, we are invited to reconsider the power of language, not only as a tool of communication, but as a cornerstone of dignity, justice, and resilience in the modern world. In just a few moments, we will have the privilege of hearing his insightful ideas that promise to challenge, inspire, and enrich us all. A special, special welcome to you, Professor DeGraff, and welcome again, everyone. Enjoy the lecture and the post-lecture discussion.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Vivette. I'm very heartened by this beautiful introduction that you just gave me. And there are a few things that you've said that have really touched me. The notion of the impact of language in society, that's exactly what, as you say, that my life's work has been dedicated to. And I feel that welcoming me to deliver this 10th distinguished lecture for Cassidy and LePage is such an honor, because they too deeply understood the importance of language for society, both in theory, but of course, also in practice, given the work, say, on the orthography of the Jamaican language. And in fact, some of my work has also involved working on the orthography of Asian Creole and producing tools to help children better learn the orthography. So in fact, when I was invited to give this lecture, I was very, very honored. And my plan was to talk about the work that I'm doing in Haiti, the work of MIT Haiti. But then between that time that I was invited and today, there's been lots of things happening in the world. And I just couldn't bring myself to talk about orthography, about theoretical linguistics, having to do with, say, writing systems, when there is such major upheaval happening in the world. And as a linguist, I've been really concerned about the use of language in trying to sort out the contours of this drama happening as we speak, as you mentioned, in Asia Minor. So my talk today, so I'm going to share my slides so we can get, because I have so much to say that, in fact, I've been struggling.
Hold on,
Yes.
Professor DeGraff. Dr. Farquharson is going to continue and then invite you for the time when you're to share after you get your full introduction.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
But welcome. C'est un plaisir.
Merci, madame.
Okay, thanks, Professor DeGraff. Thanks, Head. So there was one important thing that the head pointed out, the role of the Jamaican language unit in research, but also that we do not only deal with research on the Jamaican language and the language situation in Jamaica, but also that advocacy and social justice is an important part of our mandate. And that is exactly invited to have this conversation with us. We wanted to do a proper welcome, Prof. DeGraff, from the faculty, so you know that you're very welcome here, and that will be done by our dean, Professor Sylvia Cohenberg, who you know very well. She is a professor in linguistics and Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education at the Mona campus of UWI. She's one of the world's leading scholars in Creole linguistics and has done work on Berbice Dutch Creole, Papiamento, and Jamaican. So over to Professor Cohenberg.
As Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the annual Cassidy LePage Distinguished Lecture. And it is a great pleasure especially to welcome the distinguished speaker, Professor Michel DeGraff. In this year's lecture, we are promised a somewhat unusual topic. This comes at a time when many of us, including myself, are citizens of countries that are refusing to take action in the face of a situation where the International Court of Criminal Justice has issued arrest warrants against the Prime Minister of Israel and his former Minister of Defense. This is a situation in which, as linguists, we see how language is being weaponized in favor of a particular perspective on the war that is being waged on Palestinians in Gaza and on the West Bank. In the Caribbean, we tend to think about language in the region, and we tend to think about histories in the region, histories of colonization, histories of oppression, and their modern outcomes that are characterized by inequities and a lack of voice for many. Geography is a confounding factor in this. We don't see how Palestine and Jamaica, or Palestine and Haiti, are similar. After all, they are so very far apart. Their people look so very different. Their languages sound so very different. And yet, we also see that there are historical parallels, same histories of colonization and subjugation. So I look forward to learning more from this lecture and to see how scholar activism takes shape in this particular context. Once again, welcome on behalf of the Faculty of Humanities and Education.
Interestingly, between Joseph, Vivette, and Sylvia, I think you've captured the essence of what I want to speak about. And so, Sylvia, you're absolutely right. Often people, when they see me wearing a kafiyeh, for example, which I've been wearing long before October 7th, and I'll get into that history a little bit, maybe if we have time. They often ask me, in fact, that was a title of a speech I gave for the graduation of students at MIT who've been protesting the genocide in Gaza. So I started with this by saying, why do I wear a kafiyeh? And my answer is basically very simple, because Haiti was Palestine before Palestine was occupied Palestine. And basically what I want to do here, I want to give a longer answer to why I do wear a kafiyeh with solidarity with the people in Palestine, and not just people in Palestine, but with all of those people that Frantz Fanon called the wretched of the earth. So can I try to share my slides now? Will that work?
You should be able to.
Okay, so let me do that. Okay, so do you see my screen? Yes? Joseph, do you see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Okay. So actually, Joseph, when you invited me way back when, my affiliation was with the MIT Linguistics section. But just last week, I've had to modify my affiliation because I've been formally transferred out of the MIT linguistics unit. And in fact, part of my talk is going to be looking at what's happening at MIT as a microcosm of the use and misuse of language and linguistics for domination versus liberation. And it's really, really important that we realize that although we're going to be talking a lot about a war on words, a war with words, a war about words, but I do want us to remember that as we speak, there's a genocide happening. And the way, I have a 6-year-old daughter, and I want her to understand the reality of the world that she's living in. And I found this poem, which it's a poem called If I Must Die, and this is a Creole version, which I translated. And I want to start by reading it because to me, it makes me remember what it's like to be a father who's losing a child. And there are thousands and thousands of parents in that situation. There are thousands of children that are being killed as we speak. So, s'il doit mourir, ou doit vivre, pour raconter l'histoire, pour vendre sa femme, pour acheter morceau de toile avec ficelle, morceau de toile blanc avec un kékilon. C'est comme ça, nous petit monde dans Gaza, nous allons regarder ciel la danger. Nous allons attendre papa qui était parti traverser la fumée. Sans pas dire personne au revoir, pas même colis, pas même tête li. Si mon ouais cap là, cap où t'es fait pour mourir, cap volé dans nuage et puis il pensait pour un petit moment, c'est un ange cap volé, cap poté la motoune. S'il doit mourir, quitter la mort pour journée espoir. Quitter la mort bourgeonner histoire. So the most important part of this poem for me as a linguist is the beginning and the ending. If I must die, you must live to tell my story. And in the end, if I must die, let death produce hope. Let death produce a tale, a story. And to go back to the introduction that we got, linguistics is part of telling those stories of those who have died while fighting. And that reminds me of where I come from in Haiti. Our revolution was fought on this battle cry that said, liberté ou soit la mort, liberty or death. So I want to follow what the poet Rifat Al-Ahrir, who was killed soon after he wrote this poem, and many of his family was killed. He became a grandfather, and then his grandchild was killed. And this is a balanced story now in Palestine, of entire families being decimated. And let's tell the story. Let's use linguistics to try to uncover these stories. So there's lots of debate about whether what's happening today is a genocide. Now, foremost experts in genocide studies, like Amos Goldberg, are very categorical. What's happening today is a genocide. And as Sylvia mentioned at the introduction, the ICC court has just issued an arrest warrant for the Prime Minister of Israel for these crimes against humanity. And now the part that we as educators must worry about, we as linguists must worry about, is the role that education and language play in making this genocide normal for the whole society. And it's so normal that today in Israel, there are schools who take children on bus tours, on field trips, to peer into Gaza to watch the genocide. Okay, this is a recent article that was shared with me by an MIT student. It's called Stare into Gaza, and the photo you see on the right is a field trip by students who are staring into Gaza to reveal into the killing of children like them. And the author writes, the grotesque horror of a school field trip arriving at this location from 2 hours away to watch the mass slaughter from an observation desk was a shock I was overwhelmed by. And then it goes on to say that the children were disappointed because there weren't as many killings as they were expected. There weren't as many bombings as they were hoping for. Now, when I read this piece, the first thought that came to my mind is a film, a very disturbing film that I saw a few months ago, Zone of Interest. It's a movie, it's a film about the genocide of the Jews in Europe. So it's a family that's growing up living an apparently normal life, while the father is a Nazi responsible for the very mechanical killing of Jews in gas chambers. So what you see here in that photo, in the foreground, you have a family having a beautiful gathering in a beautiful space, and what you see in the back is Auschwitz. It's where Jews are being burned, turned into ashes in gas chambers. And in the movie, it's disturbing because you see this family pretending to, well, they have a normal life. Not pretending, they have a normal life, while this mass slaughter is happening right next door. And what you see here might be even worse, because in this case, it's not like if, those children have no choice. They're being brought to watch the genocide. So one has to ask, how can that be possible? And my thesis here is that language has played a major role in normalizing evil in this particular context. And this is what, and I want this distinguished lecture to be a call to my fellow linguists. And I've been trying to raise this alert now for almost a year. And the first time I raised this alert was at the LSA, the meeting of the Linguistics Society of America, when I was a member of the Executive Council there. Because one thing which became very obvious to me, for example, watching on December 5th, 2023, watching the Congress meeting about anti-Semitism on campus, and there were 3 presidents of universities, well-known, Harvard, UPenn, and my own MIT, in Congress, being questioned by mostly Republicans, portraying campus protests as being anti-Semitic. And I was shocked by one question by Elise Stefanik. She asked she asked 2 questions that you see in fact, they're kind of alluded to in the highlighted box. The first one is, do you know that Intifada mean calling for the genocide of the Jews? And she was trying to ask them, so what are you doing about this on your campus? But that question, I mean, that's something which I've learned from David Beaver and Jason Stanley. I'll talk about the work a bit later. So that question has a very, very noxious presupposition. The fact that the word Intifada in Arabic means calling for the genocide of the Jews. But that notion was not challenged in Congress. It's as if it was accommodated by the people there to assume that in fact that's right, but in fact that it's totally wrong. And the other, I'll come back to that. The other point that she made was that she asked each of the presidents, do you believe that Israel has the right to exist? So in that question, again, there's lots of linguistics involved here that one should try to apply, because there's a presupposition that, in fact, this is a fine question, but would one ask, does the US have the right to exist? Or does Australia have the right to exist? That wouldn't, it's hard to imagine a similar question in that context. But now one could compare the history of the US with that of Israel, settler-colonial history, right? But that question, whether one, I'm trying to wave to have the light turned back on. So that question is really asked in this context. now, interestingly, that date, December 5th, 2023, is also the date when I proposed a course to my colleague in linguistics about the use of language in linguistics for decolonization and liberation, because I was actually quite disturbed by the use of language in this context for domination. So, to make a long story short, when I proposed to the LSA that we should have a statement about this misuse of language, and I even brought up the ways in which language normalizes evil, and I brought up the example of zone of interest, where the use of language there is clearly designed to normalize evil. And I was attacked. I was attacked as being anti-Semitic. Interestingly, the same people attacking me for being anti-Semitic, there was also this assumption that being anti-Israel, being anti-Zionist, being against the occupation of Palestine, that alone is anti-Semitic. So this is why I think it's really important for linguists to do exactly what I highlight here, to use our expertise to deconstruct the ways in which words have been weaponized in order to create and keep these hierarchies of humanity. And in this particular case, because of Palestine, it's what happens among Israelis and Palestinians and the allies. Now, leaving what happened at the LSA, where my proposal was rejected, let's move now to what happened at MIT. At MIT as well, when I proposed this course on December 5th, very quickly, I get pushback. The first pushback is this course does not fit linguistics. The course on language and linguistics for decolonization and liberation does not fit linguistics. And then I was told that I lack expertise to teach that course. Now, both reasons given to me to reject the course are straightforwardly bogus. The first one, the notion that this doesn't fit linguistics, given that it was a course that was under the rubric of special topics, an elective course, special topics are designed to cover materials that are not part of the regular curriculum. That's why they are called special topics. And it's clearly explained in our guide. It's explained that you teach on a special topic if you want to work on a theme that's outside the regular curriculum. So the notion that it doesn't fit is quite bizarre. And then that I would lack expertise goes against the whole tradition in the department that seminars are designed to build expertise. You do a seminar on a new topic often when you want to create expertise in that particular area. So, and this is what my colleagues have been doing for, I've been in the department for 28 years. And regularly the course descriptions say, well, we're going to explore this topic, which is new, we don't know where we're going, but we're going to build expertise. Sometimes they send a syllabus that's just 4 lines or 1 sentence. Since it's a new topic, we'll just make it up as we go. But in my case, as the sole Black faculty at linguistics, here am I proposing a topic that's dear to my heart on social justice, and I'm told that I lack expertise and it doesn't fit linguistics. But not only there was this pushback, but then my department head and my dean started extracting cost for my daring to propose this course, and then for my daring to complain about the pushback, because I started complaining that this is not fair and trying to alert the community about this. And then I was penalized for sending email to too many people, including list servers. And the pushback included withholding my pay raise. And eventually, I was expelled from the department. And we'll talk about that a bit more. But I want to underline one point that's really important, because there again, it's the use of language, the misuse of language that we have to try to demystify here. So the very first response I got about the course was that this title, using terms like decolonization and liberation, creates concern. And then I asked myself, given that my work for the past 20 years has been about social justice and linguistics, why would decolonization and liberation create concern, given that these are two key terms that one should presuppose in struggle for social justice? They cannot be social justice if you colonize. They cannot be social justice if you enslave or if you oppressed. So, and if we go back just 3 years ago, in 2021, this was my special topic seminar. It was a seminar on linguistics and social justice, language, education, and human rights. So on what ground then would one claim that that in this particular case, looking at liberation and decolonization, it would be unfit for linguistics? But now let's move on, because what I've been asking is what could be the reason why such a course would create, would become such a threat. And actually, interestingly, the answer came from a student. He's a student at Bard College, where I gave a talk once, and a poet, is so eloquent, which is that the reason why some linguists might hesitate to address the use of language in this conflict is because what's happening today is one where you see so many systems of destruction and oppression on display, and they are intertwined often through language. And once you start demystifying the ways in which language is used as propaganda in this conflict, then you cannot look away from the fact that our own world needs to be changed as well in some fundamental ways. You see, and we need to look inward. And I think, this is from a student, but when I read and reread her answer, I think she's right. And if I took a very, very informal poll on Twitter to try to decide, okay, am I alone to be dreamy, to think that language is important, that we linguists need to engage with the use of language around this genocide? And in fact, I was quite heartened because, first of all, I read this a tweet from UNESCO saying that it was in the context of the Holocaust and other genocide, like in Rwanda, saying that genocide often starts with words. So words of dehumanization are often the first steps for genocide. And interestingly, what you see, for example, in the book that I referred to a few times, The Politics of Language, the book by David Beaver and Edison Stanley, they have an entire chapter on the use of language by the Nazis. And it's clear that the Nazis made very efficient use of language to dehumanize the Jews. So UNESCO is right. So when I asked on Twitter, so how many linguists think that we should engage in this demystification process of language propaganda, I was very pleased that the majority of linguists who responded were in agreement, which contrasts with the LSA perspective. The LSA, the leadership of the LSA thought that, and they were clear, the reason why is for fiduciary reasons. If we get into that, if we get into making statements about Israel, then we're going to get into trouble with our membership, right? So again, just think of the reasons given to not help in trying to create peace and understanding around an issue like a genocide. Now imagine the kind of statements we had from the LSA a couple of years ago about Ukraine. In no time there was a statement about Ukraine, that what's happening there should be worrisome for us. There's been statement about racism. There's been statement about gender pronouns. You see, so the LSA has not shied away from making statements about political issues having to do with gender, having to do with race, having to do with Ukraine. But when it comes to Palestine, what do we see? The Palestine exception, you see? But now let's bring it back closer to us at MIT. What's happened early this month is another symptom, another reflex of this Palestine exception. To make a long story short, at MIT, we've had long debates 2 years ago. There was a case of a professor that was invited to give a talk to attract Black students, minority students into a particular field. And because it was found out that this professor is racist, there was an uproar and he was disinvited. So that created among various sectors at MIT a need to discuss free speech and academic freedom. And there was a clear consensus that We need absolute free speech. In fact, I had colleagues come to my office because I was actually a bit resisting that notion of, everything goes. It's okay to insult Black students. It's okay to tell them that they are stupid because that's free speech, right? But some colleagues were insisting that, I cannot be a good teacher if I have to worry about, say, my Black students' feelings. And I said, well, if you're a good teacher, you have to. You see, and I had colleagues come to my office telling me, well, Michel, we should all promote absolute free speech. And then 2 years after, this is what we have. This is a petition happening as we speak, because there is a student, a PhD student called Prahlad Yengar. So Prahlad got suspended. Actually, his case so parallels my own story. So he got suspended. Why? Because he wrote a scholarly article about pacifism. And if you want to get more details, please you can click on this. You can get your phone on this QR code, and you'll get many more details about Prahlad's case, also about my case. But in terms of language, let's go back to language. Let's go back to the weaponization of language. What's interesting in the case of Prahlad is that because he wrote this article about pacifism, basically comparing various uses of pacifism versus non-pacifism in various social movements. It talks about Gandhi, it talks about monks who are self-immolating, it talks about Martin Luther King, it talks about Malcolm X, and he refers to an important book called Pacifism as a Pathology by Ward Churchill. So it's a very scholarly article. And then guess what? It gets suspended because some other students complain that this article makes them feel uncomfortable. And they even call him a terrorist for writing an article about pacifism. Okay, now the use of the term terrorist, if you take that in the geopolitical context of the genocide in Palestine, what you see is that it's been used in many ways as the term for that is accusation in the mirror, where you have accusations being made that certain people are being terrorists, and then it's an excuse to go after them, to kill them because they're terrorists, which in a way reminds us of Prahlad's case, right? Prahlad is being labeled a terrorist, and then he's being suspended, right? But what you see in this slide here is that you have all these journalists being killed, some of them with sniper, as they're doing the job. So I think in Gaza today, it's as this article says from the Time magazine, is the deadliest period for journalists in modern history. Are they all terrorists? But let's go back to Prahlad. So this is the piece by Prahlad, and so the reason why Prahlad is suspended, and the whole issue of this beautiful magazine called Written Evolution. The reason why it was banned is the claim that it incites violence, and then there is the use of this poster that you see here. This poster is from the Popular Party for Liberation in Palestine, PFLP, and it's been called a terrorist organization by the State Department. And MIT says that an MIT publication that's approved by MIT should not be using images of groups that label as terrorists. Now, this argument is empirically bogus, because if you go into MIT libraries, even if you go to MIT Press, now this is a book published by MIT Press called Red Lines. Actually, the title is very interesting. The title is Red Lines, Political Cartoons and the Struggle Against Censorship, right? And interestingly, there is a very, part of the book is about this Palestinian cartoonist called Mohammed Sabaneh, and this cartoonist, what you see there on page 4 of that book is the logo of Hamas. The logo of Hamas. And it bears copyright of MIT. So if MIT were to be consistent, what they would have to do then, they would have to ban MIT Press and quickly ban that book as well. You see, just to show you, the level of contradictions in the use of language. I mean, we can call that bureaucratic language, and we'll get back to that. The notion of the function of bureaucratic language in the things that it presupposes, which eventually are done for political repression, not for truth at all. And in my case, again, I can talk about more details here, but I'm being accused. The reason for my being expelled from MIT linguistics is because I'm accused of chilling speech, causing disruptions, and intimidation. Let's look at more of the details of the letter that I got. So I got this letter November 14th. Sorry for the date. It's 2024, not 04. November 14th, 2024. This is what I get from the dean. Okay, so my speech has caused disruption of activities of the linguistics section. And it goes on to say, well, because I allegedly have dragged people's name in the mud in public forum. And what I've done is write articles. I've written an article in the Tech, which is a student-run publication, an article in Le Monde Diplomatique, which is an international publication, Le Monde, and an article in Inside Higher Education. So this is where I've published about my case to raise awareness about what's going on. And as a consequence, I've been transferred, maybe temporarily deported from the linguistics section to being a faculty at large. Now look at the use of language. Again, as linguists, think of terms like disruption, when in fact my teaching has been disrupted. The disruption is not me causing them disruption. They've banned me from teaching a class that I proposed, which is the first time in the history of the section. They talk about dragging names in the mud, but in fact, I've been slandered. They claim that I lack expertise, and that they even claim that I don't have scholarly competence to teach about language and linguistics in Haiti, Palestine, and Israel. That's them, slandering me and killing my own speech. And then, of course, there's the fact that there is an imbalance of power. It's like comparing Israel with billions of weapons coming from the US, from our taxpayer dollars, and Palestine, we don't have a tech even. And I have no power, right? So they take my pay raise away. What's my power? So to think that I'm the one being intimidating and the one disrupting it's a classic case of accusations in a mirror, or where every accusation is like a confession, okay? And the worst part is that each of these measures have been taken without any due process. There's been no transparent process where I can go and defend myself, say, well, you're accusing me of this, but in fact, look at that. No such. But there's a reporter who wrote this piece in the Curriculum of Higher Education. She did a very good job. Amanda Friedman is to look at what's happening at MIT Linguistics and put it in a larger context. The fact that their Congress, so you have all these members of Congress who are now even more in power, and something that we should think about what will happen in January 20th with Trump going to the White House. But what she shows is that there's a larger movement to repress any speech that's viewed as being anti-genocide or pro-Palestinian. So, for example, in Florida, the chancellor of the state university has ordered a review of all courses for anti-Israel bias, right? And so basically, other scholars have seen my case as a symptom of a much larger disease in education. And this is not something that's new. We know about what's happened in Florida, what's happened in Texas, the banning of textbooks, books removed that talk about race, that talk about vaccines, about global warming. But in this particular case, what's rearing its ugly head is what we can call now this Palestine exception. Although, when we go further in this discussion, we'll see that maybe it's not an exception. In fact, Prahlad, when we speak about what's happening, he calls it a universal contradiction. And we're going to see indeed that the contradiction often arises even outside of the case of Palestine, like in the case of Haiti, for example. And this is just to remind you where we've been. So, at MIT 2 years ago, as you see here, there was a very robust discussion about free speech, but academic freedom. And at the end of it, there was this commitment being expressed that there should be free expression. And we should include views our opinions that may not be shared by all, and that even might be harmful to some, right? So even speech that can be harmful to some should be accepted, because we need debate and deliberation of controversial ideas, because that's the hallmarks of education research, right? Okay, so you can see how the contradictions that have arisen in the case of Prahlad, writing about pacifism and being banned, and the whole journal itself being banned because it contains an article that some view as inciting violence, which it's a scholarly article. So now what I want to do, I want to take a bit of a deep dive into the seminar itself, and we can together think of the claims being made that it's a seminar that doesn't fit linguistics, because then there's a larger question: what is linguistics? What is language? What's our job as linguists vis-a-vis social justice, vis-a-vis genocide? And what makes this particular course not linguistics, according to MIT linguistics leadership? And then there's also the idea of lack of expertise. So let's look at what's happening in the course, and then for us to get a sense of why it's created such an uproar, such pushback among linguists. Many of them call themselves liberal progressive, which is an interesting thing to think about, right? These are liberal progressive, scholars who, somebody would tell me, Michel, I agree with your views 98%. Basically, politically, we are aligned, except that here and there we might not agree. So these are the same folks who say that this particular course is not linguistics and that I cannot teach it because I lack expertise, although it's an advanced seminar. Okay, so the focus of the course is on decolonial and post-colonial linguistics. I was surprised that one of my colleagues thought that there's no such field. What do you mean, linguistics for anti-colonial purpose? But I had to say, well, there's a field called social linguistics, and within that field, there are people who are very interested in social justice. There's even a journal called the Journal of Decolonial Linguistics. There are journals where I've published with decolonial in the title. So I had to, try to educate my colleagues about, language is not just syntax and semantics and morphology and phonetics. There's also language in society, which you wouldn't know if you look at the mission statement of MIT, of MIT linguistics. There's no mention of society. So the goal of the course is to look at the politics of language and linguistics, and really to try to, whatever we can learn, to see if it can be used for liberation. And the overall objective is really something which is very important to me, and that's it's at the core of my identity as a linguist for decades, right? Is to, in fact, that's how I became a linguist, because I was interested in understanding why Haitian Creole was viewed as a broken French, and why it's not used in the classroom, and why it's creating so much angst among children, and why the country is so impoverished. So I became a linguist because I was interested in the use of linguistics for liberation, for decolonization. And the goal of this course is on the very same track, right? To apply insights from linguistics and other fields like philosophy, history, law, sociology, education, computation, human rights, to issues of social justice in Haiti, Palestine, and Israel. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to give you a sense of the arc of the entire seminar so far. So we started way back when, because again, with the notion that linguistics is not relevant for social justice, I wanted to make sure that the participants understand that what I'm doing is nothing new. In fact, language has always been used as a tool for power and a tool for liberation. And we start with Nebreja, which is a famous quote, when Nebreja, after having written the first grammar for a so-called vernacular language, in this case Spanish, when he gave this grammar to the Queen of Spain, we told him, well, I speak Spanish, why bother with the grammar of Spanish? And she told him, no, my queen, language has always been the companion of empire. So you need this book for conquest. And the queen was still not convinced, but then he had an advocate, the Bishop of Avila, who did a better job to explain to the queen that, look, once you put your yoke, and that's an interesting term, if you think of, so once you put your yoke upon barbarians' throats who speak outlandish tongues, then you need for them to understand that those barbarians, they need your laws and they need your languages. They need your language because that's what will make them human, right? And another foundation for this course is from none other than my esteemed colleague, Noam Chomsky. So Noam Chomsky wrote this amazing piece in 1967 on the ways in which intellectuals are responsible for telling the truth. And it was in the context now of Vietnam. And what Chomsky was noticing is that there were intellectuals who were basically bending over backwards to please the Trump of the era, right? So back then, there was no Trump yet, but there were folks promoting the war in Vietnam, and there were historians who, instead of telling the truth about the history of Vietnam, were more than willing to compromise themselves in order to go with power, right? So that piece is very important in the context of the work that we're doing in that seminar. And then we start with Haiti, because again, this is where I say that, Haiti was Palestine before Palestine was occupied Palestine, because the history of Haiti is one that many of you know very well from the Caribbean. It's where the Black Lives Matter movement started before hashtags. And we start with this book, a very important book about the ways in which the history of Haiti can teach us various lessons in our fights against colonial power, right? So we're lucky that Cassidy came and discussed with us the linguistic dimension of the struggle of Haitians against colonial power, and how the language itself, even if you look at certain Creole words, those words are basically like the archives of a people fighting for the dignity, for the sovereignty. And then we move to two semanticists. These are linguists, talking about, unfit for linguistics. So these are two well-known, in fact, Maconel Ginet, she used to be the president of the LSA, and she has this book, an important book called Words Matter. And then Beaver and Stanley, I strongly recommend this book on the politics of language. Actually, that book gives the entire seminar a very helpful framework to analyze what's happening today in bureaucratic language, coming from MIT, coming from Israel, coming from, it's so useful to look at the way this book analyzes presuppositions, accommodation, really pragmatic and semantic apparatus in producing and transmitting ideology. Okay, so this is David Beaver in the seminar, and one central point that he made in his lecture is the fact that language is never neutral. And whenever we think of the notion of language being neutral, or more generally, whenever we think of education being neutral, this is just like a trick. It's a mind trick to enforce the oppressor's power, right? So then it talks, it has a long section on bureaucratic language, and again, we don't have time to go over that, but I recommend that you read this book and you get all the details there. And then one part that's really important is the part about accusations in a mirror in terms of genocide. So we won't read that, but let's keep going. And then we had these three scholars, Palestinian scholars, political scientists, a legal scholar, and an educator. So all three sessions had linguistic ingredients in them. So La Farsac talks about looking at definitions and redefinitions of Zionism, because that notion is so important. What is Zionism? And also, what is Judaism? Because what you see happening in Congress and at NYU and many other places is this conflation of Zionism and Judaism. And she explained very well, and we'll look at some of the texts that we looked at together back then, the foundations of Zionism. And then Rabbi Agbaria, what he talked about was the Nakba. The Nakba is this dramatic event, it's a catastrophic event in the history of Palestine when thousands of Palestinians were forced to be displaced. But then because of the creation of Israel, and then what he explains very well, Agbaria, is the fact that we need the Nakba to become a legal concept. Like genocide is a legal concept, we also need the Nakba to become its own legal concept, because it's not the same as apartheid, although it includes apartheid. It's not the same as displacement, although it includes displacement. It's not the same as genocide, although now it obviously includes genocide. It's not the same as fragmentation of communities. It includes that as well, etc. And then Camelia Suleiman, she talked about something which is very close to me as a Haitian, what it means for students in Palestine, say in East Jerusalem, to go to university and to have to learn in Hebrew when the home language is Arabic, and they even have to do Arabic studies in Hebrew. And what does it do to the identity as Palestinians? And then now, so we're a philosopher. This is Joseph Levine. And basically what he allowed us to understand using very strong arguments about presuppositions again. So what does it mean to say, does Israel have a right to exist? What do you mean by Israel? So of course, whenever someone asks you that question, you have to ask them, what are you presupposing? What's your presupposition when you use the word Israel? Do you mean the Israel that's the ethno-nationalist state that excludes Palestinians as human beings or make them into lesser human beings? Or do you mean an Israel that will be truly democratic, where Palestinians and Israelis have equal rights? And that's the key question, because when often people ask you, does Israel have the right to exist? They presuppose, like Stefanik in Congress, when she asked that question, her presuppositions are very much like the one that she has with Intifada. They are very tendentious. And as philosophers, as linguists, we have to be able to demystify these layers of Orwellian speech, because it's a trick question, that question. And it did a very good job in helping us understand that. And what we had after that is Samira Alayan. What she helped us understand is the ways in which education in both Israel and Palestine, especially looking at textbooks, how they become the site of power struggles, where each side tells the story in a way that's not really accurate. There are all these erasures. And in the case of textbooks in Palestine, because the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Education, I keep making this laugh, the Ministry of Education of Israel has control over those textbooks. What you see happening often is that you have blank pages whose contents has been removed by the Israelis who don't want Palestinians to learn certain aspects of the history, right? And then now this is perhaps the session, one of the two sessions that created, that were very eye-opening. And so this is Nurit Piledelanen. So she's an Israeli, educator, semioticist, linguist. And what she's done, for her life's work is to study, analyze Israeli textbooks. And now think of the scenes that we started with, the scene of those children going on a field trip to watch the genocide in Gaza from a deck and hoping to see bombings, children being killed. And so those textbooks, as they're analyzed by Nurit Redelanen, now you can understand why it's a normal thing for these children to be taken to watch Palestinians being killed, because that's what the textbook teach them. As she puts it there, and this is her analysis, that the textbooks, they weaponize the trauma of the Holocaust in order to turn the other in Israel, and the other typically is the Palestinian, into a threat, into a neo-Nazi. right? And so she has this paper called The Natification of Palestinian Israeli Text School Books, and then she has an article about education in Israel as mind infection. So the term mind infection is one that has created quite an unease, lots of pushback, lots of insults against me for having quoted this term from Nurit Peredelana, because you'll see, I'll show you some slides later on. People take offense at the term mind infection, but it's a technical term that uses from the work of Richard Dawkins. That is that the textbooks, they introduce these viruses in the mind of the children, and the viruses capture those children's thinking as part of a project of power to keep Palestinians as lesser human beings, right? So this is what he calls mind infection, a virus that takes over, like a computer virus, takes over the children's CPU and turn them into machines for domination of another people, right? So that's the meaning of mind infection. And this is something which is very, as a Haitian, I have a first-hand view of the ways in which textbooks function like that. So because when I was a child, this is what I grew up with. I grew up with books that infected my mind, because for the first 18 years of my life, I thought that my native language, Haitian Creole, was broken. This is my infection, because the textbooks, they have these viruses that take over our mental capacity to convince us that we're inferior if we speak Creole. You see, so this is a report card when I was a child. The use of Creole is prohibited. This is me as a child, and again, a report card. And this is a classic. They're called symbol. Symbol is to punish. It's to punish children who are caught speaking Creole. It says here that I must always speak French, otherwise I'm the gorilla of the class. That's mind infection, and it gets worse. So this is my Haitian literature text, right? Written by a French brother and a Haitian scholar. And the text tells us that the use of Creole is ridiculous. That with Creole, Haiti cannot achieve anything. That Creole will never be nothing but a patois. Forget about Creole. And the last part, parents, never speak Creole to your child. So this one here, parents, never speak Creole to your child because French is a habit. So you always have to correct the Creolisms, right? And it goes on and on. So now this is a history textbook. So the history textbook here, it tells us that our heroes, this is, think of Haiti with that beautiful history of revolution. That book tells us that our heroes are Las Casas, Boutin, Jamaïguiou. These are missionaries. So Las Casas was a Spanish friar who convinced the European powers to start the slave trade because he wanted to protect the Indians, the so-called Indians, the native of the Tainos and the Arawaks. So, well, let's bring the Africans as beasts, as furniture to make them work. You see, and this is what the history textbook asks us to adore, Las Casas. And then Jacques-Michel Gourgue tells us that these books are a real danger for society. He calls it the process of auto-destruction, that we must stop those books because those books teach us to hate ourselves. And then you can see it, for example, here. This is an article last year from Aibo Post about those books are so powerful that they make Haitian children be afraid of black dolls. So in urban, at least in urban areas, when a child goes to a store to buy a doll, typically they will want to buy the white doll, not the black doll, because the black dolls are viewed as being evil, right? That's mind infection, right? And I go even further, that even a linguistic text also carry mind infection. So this is like in the New York Times, for example, the notion that Creoles approximate the most languages because Creoles begin as speaking languages. So this, even at the level of higher education, you still have in the New York Times producing texts that trigger mind infection, viruses that make us believe in certain hierarchies of humanity, where if we're a Creole speaker, we're supposed to be primitive, right? But then if you look at the response from Twitter, when people saw, read slides, they tagged me because they say, my infection is very, very close to the Nazi rhetoric about Jews being a threat, a biological threat, and therefore I should be fired. And this is just, this quote here is pretty mild compared to others that you can see on Twitter. The other interesting session that we had in the seminar is one that's actually, she's a graduate from MIT. She did a comparison from MIT. Then she went to Columbia, and at Columbia, this is Ollie Jackson. She did a thesis in human rights. As she was a student at MIT, she was a student of this one of my favorite history professors, Ali Magam, and Puya's supervision, she started looking at the ways in which media biases lessen the humanity of Palestinians. So in that article that you see on the left, she studied 33,000 articles from the New York Times showing consistent bias against Palestinians in terms of which construction they use to talk about Palestinians, passive versus active, choice of words, naming, how they report on casualty. It's systematic, and she did it using large data sets, using international methods. And then for a thesis at Columbia that she finished a couple of years ago, what she did is something that's very close to us at MIT, which is the use of Israeli lobby through campus organizations that claim to promote religious life, but what they do, in fact, they promote ideologies in this particular case of Zionism. So the goal of these campus groups is to promote the interests of Israel as a Zionist power that, as this ethno-nationalist state that should have more rights, where Israeli Jews should have more rights than Palestinians, right? And interestingly, soon after we got that presentation, in real life, there was this very clear illustration of the sort of media bias in the New York Times. And as linguists, it's so easy to see this bias in real time by comparing, say, so Sylvia is from Holland, so she probably will know more about this than I do. But after these attacks, so-called attacks that are driven by anti-Semitism against the supporters of this Israeli soccer team. So the first title, and this is why I say so-called anti-Semitic attacks, because the first title just say, violent attacks in Amsterdam tied to anti-Semitism. Then little by little, over days, you saw the New York Times change the title. Then the ultimate one that you see at the bottom left says, Israeli soccer fans injured in Amsterdam after the attacks that authorities called anti-Semitic. So it went from being attacks tied to anti-Semitism to attacks that authorities called anti-Semitic. So you see the distancing between the New York Times and the claim that there was that what was driven the attacks was anti-Semitism. And in fact, there are clear reports that show that the fans of the soccer team, they were attacking pro-Palestinian supporters, and they were even singing very subtle songs. Like this song, for example, asks, why in Gaza there are no schools? Because there are no kids remaining, and that's what those fans were singing. But yet the reports talked about anti-Semitism, and not a word in the title about anti-Palestinian racism, right? So that's okay. So let's keep that. Okay, so because of time, I'm going to skip quite a bit of a few slides that I had to talk about the way in which the media, and also if you look at what's happening on Twitter and X and Instagram and other social media, there's this constant anti-Palestinian bias. And perhaps the most, if you, as linguists, if you want to study those data, I would suggest this recent piece, which actually tells a lot about the misuse of language, again, in the press. So here, this is a reporter who came to the seminar undercover as a student. So she came to my seminar, passing as a student, and she was a reporter from this publication called the Daily Wire. And then she makes this claim that in my seminar, I'm teaching that Jews have no connection to Israel, and that Israeli textbooks weaponize trauma of the Holocaust. So the second part is true, but the first part is a huge lie. But what's interesting is the way in which she takes offense at the term malinfection, right? So it looks like this term is one that really triggered lots of anger on the part of Zionist observers, right? But what's interesting here is that the goal of this magazine, of this publication, is to support a mission to be the voice of sanity and fight the radical leftist agenda, right? So what I want to take, I want to analyze here is the notion that what's happening in terms of pro-Palestinian speech versus anti-Palestinian speech has to do with the leftist agenda. My claim is that, in fact, when it comes to that exception against Palestine, it cuts across the left and the right. At MIT, for example, what you see is that you have faculty who you would think would be, progressive on the left, but yet they are also against voices that are against the genocide. Right? So just to take a little pause here and understand why this misuse of language is so important, let's listen to Arundhati Roy, who says it actually so beautifully. I thought I would take a break here and listen to her.
What a real writer does is they spend their lifetime trying to close the gap between language and thought. And you spend a lifetime trying to develop a language that is completely, which has a vocabulary that is completely the opposite of what it's meant to mean. So when you say freedom, you mean something else. When you say democracy, you mean something else. When you say empowering so-and-so, you mean something else. So there, the cornerstone of much of what goes on in the world is that the keystone is the capture and the turning around of language.
Okay, so what I want to do now is to fast forward a bit and look at the ways in which history has been erased through language. And here, I want to present those two books that have been very helpful in this analysis, which is a book by Michel on silencing the past, and a recent book called Erasing History, How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. Right, and just because of time, I want to go quickly and talk about some landmarks in Haitian history, and then look at the ways in which they've been erased. Right, and then we'll do the same about the history of Palestine. And what you should think about is, in parallel, how both of these histories have been erased in order to serve power, to serve hegemony. Right. So again, just to give you some quick landmarks. So this is a brief history of Haiti. So actually, when Columbus got lost in Haiti, he called it Hispaniola. So the name Haiti was erased. And just think of what also happens in Palestine, the fact that names as well are being erased. So there's a process of Hebraization where names of villages are, in fact, that's what we learned last week from a linguist from Ben Gurion in Israel, Jonathan Mendel. He told us about this process of turning the names of villages, even Jerusalem, Quds, being turned into a Hebraic sounding name. And the same happened in Haiti, where Columbus called it Hispaniola, and then they brought in the Africans, and then in 1791, the revolution, And Creole, a national language, was one of the main tools to create unity that give us the strength to win over the army of Napoleon, right? And Dessalines made it clear that we need our own language. We don't need that of others. And then also when in 1804, when he became independent, he explained very well that, we have been victims not only of military might of the French, but also were victim of the eloquence of French agents. So Dessalines back then understood the power of language for domination, the soft power of language. But then 1806, Dessalines is assassinated because of struggles for social class. And then what happened in 1825, which is actually quite a momentous event, Haiti is made to pay a ransom to the former enslavers. So in the first time in history, and I think maybe the only time in history, those who won the freedom had to pay to those who lost the war. And it was, as my colleague Malendo has called it, this was the greatest heights in history, which has been evaluated to be $21 billion. Some say even more if you take into account the loss of investment from this double debt that Haiti had to pay. And then also something that's very important in the history of Haiti is how the French, as they were imposing this financial debt on Haiti, they also engineered an intellectual debt, forcing a school system that promotes French, denying the use of Haiti's national language. Now, also keep that in mind as well. The power of language in the history of Haiti to recolonize Haiti, right? And then something very important to understand is the fact that, and this is now I'm thinking of the fact that erasing information is not new. So this is 1826, right, where you have this senator in the US saying that let's make sure that we do not teach, we do not talk about Haiti, because Haiti is a threat, right? So he says here that let us take the high ground. So let's make sure that we don't discuss Haiti at all. Okay, so but then in 1914, this is the occupation with the US on the pretext that Haitians were being, and now this is important actually, the notion that Haitians are being unruly, they're acting like savages. We have to come and put them in order. But the first thing the Americans do when the Marines arrive to Haiti, the first action is to actually take Haiti's treasury, $500,000 in gold, and bring it to the boats and take it to Wall Street. And then now you can see here the excuse that's given by Secretary of State Robert Lansing is that the Americans went to Haiti to civilize Haiti, to get it out of anarchy, savagery, and oppression, because the African race is devoid of capacity for organization, right? So this is the case of Haiti, right? Now let's go now to the case of Israel, and it's really important actually because if you look at social media, there is all this debate about whether Zionism is colonial, whether Zionism is Judaism, and actually those texts that I'm going to very quickly survey, I mean, the answer is very clear. History tells a very clear story, and these are primary texts. So the first text, which one can call the Bible of Zionism, right? This is the text by Theodor Herzl. It's called A Jewish State, right? This is a text that is a manifesto proposing how we should create a state for Jews where Jews can be safe, right? Theodor Herzl at 1899. That's the date that is here. Okay, but again, I'm going to go very quickly to the slides, but I think the story is very straightforward. So first, there's this notion that the Jews coming from Western Europe can go to Asia Minor and create this outpost of civilization in the sea of barbarism. So the Arabs are the savages, and we as Europeans, we can bring them civilization. Now, this discourse is classic, colonial discourse. And then, again, this is Herzl. You can see clearly that what he's proposing is colonization, right? That is that we have to go and colonize this land. And then here, as you can see, Herzl was considering whether to go to Palestine or Argentina. He even considered going to Uganda. Okay, and then the point that he's making here is that no matter which way we go, we have to build Jewish supremacy. We have to be the ones in control. And then he even wrote to Cecil Rhodes of Rhodesia, inviting, he said, well, you did so well as a colonizer in South Africa with Rhodesia. Please come help me do the same in Asia Minor. Why? Because it's a colonial project. And then in 1917, you have the British saying, yes, we offer you this land, so please go build. We'll support your efforts to build a homeland in Palestine. That's the Balfour Declaration, right? So you can go there and build a national home. Then there's another classic text by Jabotinsky, and you can see here clearly the spirit of the movement, right? So we are seeking to colonize a country against the British separation. We have to do it by force, and we have no other choice. So Zionist colonization, even the most restricted, must be eliminated or carried out in defiance of the will of the native population. So the evidence is very clear who the natives are. The natives are the Arabs, and we have to go by force and take over the land. And then the Holocaust happens, and this gives yet another impetus to the movement of the Zionists. And then in 1948, Israel is born, and so, but interestingly, even as Israel was being born, there were voices, Jewish voices, that were clearly anti-Zionist. This is here an important, very, very important brochure, a pamphlet by Walter Zender called "Is This the Way?" And Zender is so clear, so eloquent about the basic flaw in the Zionist project. And the basic flaw is, how can you establish a state, a nation state, where there is supremacy of one people over the other, when in fact there are people already living there? So what are you going to do with them, right? And it says here, this is a problem. Since the very beginning of this movement of colonization, uses the term colonization, we have always considered the Arab people as non-existent, right? And it's funny that it was a huge mistake, because once we settled that premise, this is a recipe for disaster, right? And then what he says that, well, in order to resolve this conflict, we have to acknowledge that the Arabs themselves have a right to self-determination. They have this right, just like we do. We cannot be looking for a space where we can have sovereignty, and at the same time deny the others the sovereignty, right? And here it talks about the fact that France and Britain, they're colonial powers. They split the land, and then they offer us a piece of that land without consulting with the Arabs. And then what it calls for here, it calls for a return to what he calls moral integrity and a look for peace. Okay, and then now we saw earlier of this talk of this use and misuse of the term terrorist. Now it's interesting here that in Is This the Way? Zender recognizes very clearly that the terrorists are the Zionists. It's the Zionists that exerted power to steal the lands of the Palestinians, right? It says that, in fact, it goes even further. It compares the naked terrorism the Zionists with that of the Germans at some point, right? So as you can see here, so it compares the Zionists with Napoleon's and Hitler's campaigns against Russia, right? And he was against it. Okay, so now, given this history, one could, you could go back to the debate that we heard between Kamala Harris and Trump. And one thing that really I found striking was that when Kamala Harris was asked about what you're going to do about what's happening in Gaza, she said, well, after October 7, we have to support Israel. So basically what she did here is one of the most spectacular erasure of history that I've ever seen on mainstream TV, that she forgot what happened for 100 years in Palestine to claim that, Israel has a right to self-defense after what happened on October 7th. And so basically what I want to point out here is that what you see happening today in Israel and Palestine, it's a repeat of what happened in Haiti. In Haiti, there was a denial that my ancestors had the right to fight, and they were going to fight to get the freedom, right? So as you can see here, this is from Touyo's book. Even as the Haitians back in 1791, even as they said to fight for the freedom, European observers could not imagine that they would fight. So this is a quote where a European observer says, well, there is no movement among our Negroes. They don't even think of it. They are very tranquil and obedient. A revolt among them is impossible. It's like, how can you imagine that you enslave the whole population and you expect that they will not revolt? So because of time, there's lots that I could keep discussing about these parallels in terms of erasures between Haiti and Israel. But what I want to do is to go to the end and to show you what's coming in the seminar. So what we had last week, again, going back now to perhaps to think of the future, what can language and linguistics offer us as tools for liberation? And just last week, we had a very moving presentation by this linguist called Jonathan Mendel on the creation of what he calls Israeli Arabic. And what he showed us is how Arabic in Israel has been weaponized against Arab speakers. And he gave us many examples of where Arabic words are translated in Hebrew as a way to dehumanize and even penalize Arab speakers. For example, someone who brought on social media a poem about, following the martyrs, and in Israeli would translate the word martyrs from Arabic into Hebrew, and in Hebrew would turn it into terrorist. And once the word martyr becomes terrorist in Hebrew, then that person who wrote that poem on social media is arrested. He's arrested, and sometimes it becomes a hell just because of a mistranslation. You see, but there is hope, because what we're going to have next week is Hannah Morgenstern, who's going to tell us about translation as resistance, right? And so there's a beautiful project called Maktub. She calls it anti-colonial translation, where she brings together Israeli Jews and Palestinians, and together they translate from Arabic to Hebrew, with the goal that through these projects, they can create seeds of peace, mutual respect, and equal humanity, right? And then what we will have after that is Viviane Censor, who's actually, she was a student of mine a few years ago, and now she became a professor. She's now an artist. She curated this exhibit, which we'll talk about as the last guest speaker, about, it's called To Be Named. And the point that she made is that she's making that exhibit with artists from Palestine. So how do the words we use impact our understanding of things, places, and people. In a time when our world is being destroyed and everything we know is being transformed and shifted, how can language help us construct new futures? Can naming things as we wish them to be actually shape them into what it is we aspire to? And how can language play a role in keeping something that no longer physically exists alive? Okay, so this is what we hope will open up something better, for the future through language and linguistics. And I want to leave the word of the end to a student, because really the goal of this seminar has always been not for my colleagues who obviously don't believe in the power of society, because if you look at the mission statement of linguistics, there is no word about society. But for the past 20 plus years, 28 plus at MIT, I've always had social justice as a core aspect of my teaching. And I was so moved to get this letter today from a student who came to the seminar last week. And she wrote this letter to me and to the administration and to my department head and to the dean. And I just want to highlight some of the things she said in that letter, because they are so deep, but also they give me so much hope. Because, of course, she says things like, imagine my surprise when DeGraff and his guest lecturer, because she's responding to the notion that, this course was not, didn't fit linguistics, and that I have no expertise to teach it. You see, but what she says here so deeply shows how important this course is for linguistics and for humanity and for, to create a better world. So MIT's motto is mind and heart for a better world. And she says that she understands how this work is laying out ways in which language can be a tool, for decolonization and bridge building, right? And she talked about this example of, how the misuse of Arabic in Israel is really it's a way to dehumanize Palestinians, right? Very profound. And then she goes on to say that, she can understand why this course has been censored. And then she talks about the fact that this is definitely not about linguistics, it's about politics, right? And then she, of course, she highlights the fact that the racism that seems to be implied in this decision, also mentioning the fact that there was this reporter who came to class and who wrote a piece in this Daily Wire with a bunch of lies and lots of racist stuff in it. She concludes by saying that, she draws this contrast between this claim by MIT leadership about academic freedom and free speech. And in fact, this is one thing that the administration is often telling the students, like, look, we cannot stop this project where faculty are collaborating with the Ministry of Defense in Israel because they have academic freedom. You see, so at the same time that the administration claims that academic freedom is so important that faculty at MIT have the right to collaborate on projects that are killing the cousins, the sisters, the children, the brothers, the parents of students from Palestine at MIT, that they have this right. And at the same time, they censor the one Black professor who wants to teach about language and social justice. So I was very moved by the way she understood, both what's happening in the course, but also the politics around the course at MIT. So I'll stop here because I do want to have some discussion if there is time for that.
Okay, Prof. DeGraff, you've given us a lot of food for thought, linking past and present, linking language and politics, linking different regions of the world that we don't normally see as having anything in common. And you wove a very nice picture of the threads that connect us as human beings. An understanding that what takes place in Creole societies is not very different from any situation out there where there are unequal systems, where there are inequities, there are asymmetrical power relationships. And I want to really thank you. I wanted to start with the concept of weaponization of language, because a lot of people, when they think of the work that linguists do, they basically think of us, if they don't think of us as people who speak several languages, they think of us as people primarily concerned with morphemes and phonemes, or as I was reminded on Monday in my class, as people who draw trees of sentences. But there's so much more that goes on in linguistics as we try to unpack, and not unpack phrases and word formation, but unpack the meaning in language. And I wondered if you could say a little bit more on how understanding how language gets co-opted as weapons, we might say weapons of mass destruction, and what's the linguist's role in helping society understand the process and ways of treating with that?
That's a great question. And one example that I like to use in terms of how language can be this tool that makes you, without you being even aware, that people can manipulate your thinking. So there's this example, actually, it's from the book by Beaver and Stanley about this insurance agent. After you have an accident, and if they want to decide how much to reimburse you for your car being totaled, so there's a study that looks at how you respond to different questions in terms of how fast the car was going. So if they ask you, how fast was the car going when it hit? But so how fast they were going when they hit each other, right? Versus how fast were they going when they smashed into each other? So what they found is that when you use the verb hit, then you're going to give a range of speeds that's lower than when someone else is asked how fast was the car going when they smashed each other. You see, so by hearing smashed, although you're describing the same event, you automatically think of cars going faster, and that will influence your answer, right? So this is one clear case where what it teaches you is to be aware that whenever you're being asked a question, almost every word in the question, even when you read the newspaper, or when you see, for example, that say by someone is being accused of being a terrorist or inciting violence. In fact, I would recommend folks to go and look at the tweet of this Daily Wire reporter that wrote this article about the seminar, and is to pay attention to the word choices about what I taught and about me, and it's really, linguistics do give us these tools to analyze, why do we pick this word versus the other? Why do we pick, for example, the passive in the case of Palestinians being killed? So and so died. So and so was hit by a rocket. But when they talk about Israelis, and this is a New York Times study now, you can see that the pattern is to use active verbs and to always identify the agent of the killing, right? So when you talk about Israelis being killed, you know who the agent of the killing is. But when you talk about Palestinians being killed, often you don't mention the agent who's doing the killing, right? And this is pervasive. In fact, so for example, here at MIT, we get all these, after student protests, we get those notes from the administration, from our president at the Conn booth. And those notes are so rich. As a linguist, you can look at the way she writes those notes and the way she describes, say, what's happening in Gaza, this is what's happening in Israel. You can see the way she describes what happened on October 7th, when Hamas did this attack on Israel, in Israel territory, versus the way she talks about what's happening afterwards. In Palestine. And linguistics gives us these tools to be very careful in comparing the constructions, the passive form, the choice of words. So it builds your media literacy in a way that protects you from participating in ideology that are often very noxious against certain groups of people. It's like, when I was a child and I was bombarded by all these messages about Black people, about Haitian Creole. But now, as a linguist, I can go back and look at this text, and see, how they were working as viruses that were, basically taking over our mind and making us think in ways that are often debilitating to ourselves. You see.
It actually reminds me of a case I came across. I was doing years ago some personal research on mass shootings in the US. And I found a specific case where this guy, a white man, had shut up a shopping mall, ran off, the police gave chase, and he barricaded himself in his house. Eventually, the police gained entrance, and he was shot and killed. I kept on trying to find information on the case and came across his obituary. And his obituary said, died at home.
Yeah.
And, I thought, how language had completely obfuscated what had happened. I was going to say reality, but it is a kind of reality. It's just how it gets reported now signals a completely different thing. Yeah. I wanted to bring up a point made by Alison, which I think is about unrealistic expectations. She says, I don't think there has been any anti-colonial movements against European colonizers that the US has supported, not in Kenya, not South Africa, and not in Palestine.
That's true. That is, yeah. In fact, on the contrary, so if you look at my own Haiti, what the US has done there, that's why for me, sometimes Haitians ask me, so why are you so worried about Palestine? So, well, because again, it's the same. In fact, my dear friend and colleague, Cassidy, talking about imperialism, he calls it like un diable. And it's very clear that like un diable, meaning the great devil, has these tentacles in so many different parts. But you cannot fight like un diable, if you don't understand the way these tentacles work, these different parts, because it's the same like un diable. So I wrote this piece with Viviane Censure, called Tout Moun C'est Moun. Every person is a person. And what we do there is to look at exactly these parallels between like un diable, it's like un diable's actions in Haiti and in Palestine, and even the weapons, so the gangs in Haiti that are creating such havoc, where are the weapons coming from? They're coming from Florida.
Yes.
And where do the weapons come from that are, those 20,000 pound bombs that are destroying civilian lives and much else, everything else in Gaza? They're coming from the US. You see, so it's the same like un diable, and we have to fight like un diable on all possible fronts. You see, and what's happening at MIT is again such a clear example of that. It's like, because why would my course become such a threat? Why would an article by a student become such a threat? Again, it's the power of language. Because language gives us that means to really unpeel the layers of hypocrisy. You see, because you can really show, what kind of presuppositions enter into those statements, into those questions, and you can show how they contradict each other, right? Because you cannot, for example, talk about chilling speech when it's my speech being chilled, so that bureaucratic language, you have to be able to analyze it very carefully to show that it's hypocritical. It's what's called accusations in the mirror. But I think, yeah. So I agree with Alison.
I'm going to try to reframe Elizabeth Montoya's statement as a question. Would you say that your experience and the experience of many other academics, and not only in relation to the conflict, the Israel-Palestine conflict, but in other spheres too, would you consider that to be a sort of recolonization of education?
That's a good question. Well, but it's interesting. I've been looking at, I have some very good librarian friends, and we've been looking at, statements that were made back in the 70s about, say, debates on the Vietnam War and concerns being raised about outside influences on, say, on research at MIT. And what you see in these archives, like I could read for you an excerpt from these archives back in 1970, and you would think it's applying today in terms of concerns being raised by students about, for example, the U.S. State Department or the U.S. Department of Defense having MIT faculty work on research that's really not for a better world. You see, MIT's motto, which I love, is mind, hand, and heart, and then the other one is for a better world. I like to put them together. So MIT's mind, hand, heart for a better world. But in the 70s, students were already complaining that this research is not for a better world; it's for destroying the world. So there's for a few years now, there's been a movement, MIT Divest, against MIT's engagement in fossil fuel projects, and of course we have this energy initiative, but there's still lots of projects coming from industries that are not so friendly to the environment. So I'm not sure if I would call it recolonization. I think that the history of higher education has long been embedded in these capitalist projects. It's like where the bottom line seems to trump values. MIT has these beautiful values that I love. You see, about belonging, about curiosity, about excellence. You see, but then you see some of these projects that are being funded, and then you say, what about those values? You see, but then you look at history, and you see that it's Chomsky was writing in 1967. So Chomsky's piece about engagement in the Vietnam War, when he was protesting against the Vietnam War, it was 1967. If you read these pieces, you can replace Vietnam by Palestine, and the same is happening today. So maybe there's never been a break in these colonial projects.
I'm probably going to take you a bit off topic, but because it's hip now to talk about AI, I wondered what are the implications, especially if it's the discourse of a specific set of people that's freely available, and that gets pumped into the machine, and the machine spits out more of the same. What do you see as the implications of AI, especially for small states, which small groups that do not have the numbers to counterbalance the discourse?
That's a good question that you're asking here. And so there's one colleague who has this paper. I recommend that paper actually because it's a major concern, because you're right that for AI to work well, you need to have huge data sets, which often we don't have for plural languages. But there is a look up the work of Heather Lent. And so we have a paper with a number of co-authors trying to create data sets for Haitian Creole. And we're trying to find ways to go against that trend that seems to prioritize data coming from languages like English and French and Spanish. It's a tall order. But I agree with you that it's we have to enter this the fray and try to also make sure that we can create AI tools that are efficient using data sets that are not that are far from being as large as what you find for English and French and Spanish, and maybe we can use the tools of AI to try to fix that imbalance of data availability. It's a big challenge, but I would recommend the work of Heather Lent on this topic. So we have a paper that came out maybe 5 months ago or so. So if you do a Google search on my name, Michel DeGraff, and Heather Lent, that will be the only thing that comes up probably, because that was our first collaboration together.
Okay. My colleague Clive Forrester at the University of Waterloo has a paper in which he upbraids activists who, in Creole communities who use the standard language as a language of activism. Is it possible at all to use the master's tool to destroy the master's house?
Well, in the case, actually, that's an interesting question that you've asked. In the case of Haiti, so which is what I know best, of course, is that it would be impossible in this case to have a social movement that's going to be successful if you do it in French. In fact, that's one thing which we've noticed in the past few years, that lots of young folks were getting very sophisticated in the use of social media and in creating popular movement. They understand that those movements cannot succeed in French. Actually, we just celebrated the anniversary of Vertier. Vertier is November 18, 1803, when we fought and won Napoleon's army. So it's a big date in Haiti's history. And one question that came up, talking to Cassidy and watching a video where Cassidy, the sociologist, and he was speaking, and he was talking about the fact that the Haitian intellectual class, they write all this beautiful work in French, but this work has no impact or little impact on the population, because the population speaks mostly Creole only. So if you want to first of all raise the profile of Vertier among the population, you have to do it in Creole. You see, so in that particular case that I know best, the master's language, will not work. You have to use the people's language, the what we call the peuple souverain, the sovereign people's language. And the same is true for education.
So jumping back to AI a little, I think this name is Pierre Fortitel or Fortitel. But I'm trying to rephrase it, and I'll pull on biblical analogy, that we are not wrestling against flesh and blood. And this is because he brought up the example of bots, that now you're not just fighting against human agents, but bots that will flood the discussion with, one type of narrative, and a narrative that is meant to frame the society in a particular way, that is meant to pit groups against each other, even groups that have a common cause. Yeah. And so I thought that was really interesting, because now it's not just the creators of language, human beings, but the machines that they create that help to drive certain narratives. So finally, I'm going to ask you, what then is your charge for Creole societies?
Well, it's to engage in these exchanges. You know, it's to understand that, you know, as Martin Luther King said so poignantly, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. You see, and I, for example, you know, I very much love. I look forward to learning a lot from these folks in Israel and Palestine who are looking at translation as a tool for resistance. You know, I think it's a, you know, because in fact in Haiti as well, you know, we do need more translators, because we have such an important uh, collection of French texts that Haitians have been writing since the 19th century, and so little of it is in Creole, and some of it is very important. We have, you know, Alexis, we have some amazing writers who wrote in French texts that are even revolutionary. We also have, you know, writers, you know, from Africa. You know, we have from the Caribbean, you know, Frantz Fanon, Aimé Césaire, and I think that those texts should be read by all Caribbean people. You know, Frantz Fanon should be in the syllabi of every Caribbean student. You know, from Haiti, Jamaica, Barbados, Saint Lucia, Guyana. So we should think of ways in which linguists should encourage the students, clearly should encourage the students to engage in these efforts of using linguistics for liberation. Also think of education. So I know that you were definition. In fact, when I teach my course on Creole languages and in the Caribbean, so Hubert's book, Language and Liberation, is you know, it's always a sign. It's part of my syllabus, and it's such a great model to follow. But I think there's also the practical aspect. You know, how do we push our communities to use our Creole languages as visual instruction? That's still a major challenge. That's still a major challenge. And it's not just using it, you know, to learn how to read and write. I think we should push the use of these languages all the way up to university, right? They're not just languages, you know, that you use for literacy. We should use them for math and science and all other fields, you see. So
okay, thanks very much. I see the lecture this evening as not the beginning or the end of the conversation, but a continuation of a very important conversation that needs to be had at all levels. So I'd like to thank you very much for opening up our minds and our eyes to what is going on out there. I lead right into the vote of thanks. There are lots of people who made this lecture possible today. I'd like to thank the MITS team led by Mr. Ishmael Preston for the technical work, absolutely well executed. I'd like to thank the Dean for carrying out her official duties and welcoming everyone. The head of department, Dr. Milson White, also for ensuring that we felt welcome and that we were ready to receive what you had to offer. To Mrs. Blagrove in the Jamaican Language Unit office, who works behind the scenes, but much of this happens because of the work that she does. So we'd like to say thanks to Thanisa Jarrett for the role you played, Paul and Edwards, who helped with the preparation of the program. Thanks a whole lot. So I don't think I have missed anybody except the audience for turning out and for the very robust discussion in the chat, which is exactly what this sort of lecture is supposed to do, is to generate discussion. But more so, we hope that we will move from discussion to think of practical applications to our various societies, practical applications to what is happening way across the ocean, and in fact, how that affects us either directly or indirectly. So thanks everyone for coming. This was the 10th staging of the Cassidy LePage Distinguished Lecture. Join us next year again when we will have the 11th and definitely another very interesting discussion on language and its role in society. Thanks very much and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you. A pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.